It's not the fact that I'm like on this big crusade against linear storytelling. For both novels and film, 75% of the stories you're going to tell will work better on a dramatic basis, on a dramatically engaging basis, to be told from a linear way. But there is that 25% out there that, you know, can be more resonant by telling it this way. And I think in the case of Pulp Fiction, it gains a lot more resonance being told in this kind of like wild way.
The whole idea of Pulp Fiction was the idea I was going to do 3 crime stories. Kind of like the stories you've seen a zillion times before, but I was just going to take them in different ways. Let real life intrude on genre. And that's part of what I wanted to go with for this.
I had an idea for a movie, and it was, you know, cliche, guy supposed to take out the gangster's wife, but don't touch her. We've all seen that a million times. That's the earliest idea I had for a sequence that I've ever done. I came up with that sequence when I was about 24, and I never wrote any more. I never even knew what happened after that, but I wrote that sequence. And so when I came up with my Pulp Fiction story, where the whole idea is to take cliched stories and put them in, I go, oh, well, let me expand that one. That'll be great.
And then I thought, well, wait a minute. They don't have to be that separate a story. What if it all takes place in a certain community? And then maybe it's about a community of characters, and so they could overlap, really intertwine it, where this character is the star of this story, but he's also in the second story, but he's not the star of it. And somebody small can be the star of the third story. So I write the first story, which is the John and Uma, and then I write the second story, which is the Bruce stuff, and then it comes time to do the third story. And the third story was a completely different story than was in the movie.
It was like a black getaway kind of thing. And I'm in Amsterdam, and I've just written the first story, I've written the second story, and I'm getting ready to start writing the third one. And I go, I can't introduce these brand new characters in fucking hour 60. Who cares? Who cares? That's not gonna work at all. And then I go, well, wait a minute. I have a non sequitur at the beginning by having these guys show up with these fellows and taking this briefcase, and I actually had the thing where they shoots the guy in the car earlier on. No, wait a minute. This is my next story. Let me just hang out with these guys all the rest of the day, and let's just see what happens. And then that started working out so great that, again, I had this other weird anxiety. I was like, wow, man, if I hadn't done this big idea with all these 3 stories, this story about how they just get rid of the body could be one of the best little gangster films ever made. I guess the ingredients for a gangster film, I think you need a good, usually you either need a good pulpy story, or you need an aspect of crime or an aspect of criminality that you want to put under a microscope. And I think if you do something like that, in almost all cases, gangster films are sort of parodies of the American dream. They're the looking glass, the askew, bizarro world of getting rich in business in America. So there always has to be some sort of a satire about even the American lifestyle attached to any gangster films.
There's a French director named Jean-Pierre Melville who came out in the 50s and basically started doing a whole series of crime films, always like set in Paris or Marseille or something, that were basically the Warner Brothers Bogart Cagney films, all right, but completely set to this like French Parisian rhythm. And they work very much in the same way that like Sergio Leone's films do, where they take a genre that like we know left, right, forwards, up and down and backwards, all right, but they do it with a whole different style and a whole different perspective. And here they've basically reinvented the genre. They've created something new that didn't exist before. Now that's what I'm always kind of trying to do with my genre films. I don't know if I'm succeeding or not, but that's the attempt. To take something you've seen before, I love it, I respect it, and I'm gonna deliver the goods, but I'm also trying to reinvent it in a way. I mean, that's why when people say, well, you're just making movies about other movies, I go, well, that's bull. I mean, to me, all my movies are, I mean, I'm working in a genre, no doubt about it, all right? And I respect the genre, and I'm jumping off from it. But to me, all the movies are very personal. I mean, I could have an idea in my head for 5, 6, 7 years, all right? The day that I sit down to do it, whatever is going on with me at the time will find its way into the piece. It has to, or the piece isn't worth making.
When we finished Reservoir Dogs and we showed it at Sundance and it was all done and I was all completely and utterly done, I go, I'm going to Europe. I'm going for the summer. I'm gonna be there for a while. So that was my European time. Not only was I writing Pulp Fiction, but I was just living, what's it like to be living in Europe and going grocery shopping and all that kind of stuff. It was great. But naturally, being an American, I kept putting everything under an American microscope, especially pop culture, and the things that were different were the things that were funny and interesting to talk about with your friends. So naturally, that just was happening to Vincent too.
All right, well, you can walk into a movie theater in Amsterdam and buy a beer. And I don't mean just like no paper cup, I'm talking about a glass of beer.
One of the things, though, that came out a lot, like when Reservoir Dogs came out, and then it was carried over with Pulp Fiction, was the fact that one of the only people out there, or films out there, that they could really kind of point a reference to, as far as like the dialogue heavy and the male dialogue heavy aspect of it, other than David Mamet, was Barry Levinson.
That's like some guy trying to sell me life insurance. You think I want to take money out of my pocket to give it to some jerk so that somebody can take it when I'm dead? No way, Sam. You gotta live for today. I'm gonna live as good as I can every day, you know what I'm saying?
Because that was actually one of the only other movies that they could actually make a reference to that had young males, or males anyway, talking and expressing and actually talking about pop culture the way my characters do too. People say, oh, you talk about pop culture all the time. Well, it's a shared language. Right. That we all have, and like for instance, like when you go to the movies over the weekend, when you come back into work on Monday morning, you talk about what you saw. They're not just gangster guys talking a bunch of gangster, yeah, sure, Louis, bring him in the back, there's not that stuff, It's like they're like, hey, my wife is coming home and you can't bring him in the back because she's gonna divorce me. All right, no marriage counselor, no trial separation. I'm gonna get fucking divorced, okay? And I don't want to get fucking divorced. And like, I actually owe a big debt to kind of figuring out my style from Elmore Leonard, because he was one of the first writers I had ever read that just let mundane conversations actually inform the characters, and then all of a sudden, you're into whatever story you're telling.
Hopefully the idea is, at least in my case, you're creating a rhythm, and you're sailing on that rhythm, and you're going with that rhythm, and you can break up the rhythms and everything, but that's what's stopping it from just being a talky drag.
Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face.
Why the fuck did you do that?
Well, I didn't mean to do it. It was an accident.
The one thing that he wanted to make sure is that people knew that they were allowed to laugh, that they didn't have to feel like, oh no, is it inappropriate that I'm laughing at this? He was like, no, I want them to know that it's okay, so I'm gonna let them in on the joke.
As far as how far can the comedy go? Well, as long as it's funny, as far as I'm concerned, as far as it can go. I mean, George Carlin does this really wonderful routine where he talks about how the fact anything can be made funny. Anything can be, you can make a joke out of anything. You name me any horrific thing and I can make a joke out of it.
I believe you can joke about anything. It all depends on how you construct the joke, what the exaggeration is.
Humor is a magnifying glass, all right, for us to look at society, ourselves, our personalities, our problems, and humor is what we need to actually observe things.
This is more of a comedy than Reservoir Dogs, but that was one of the big responses from people when you see Reservoir Dogs, and people talk about it when they first saw it, that's one of the most intense movies ever. And then they see it a second time, and God, it wasn't as violent as I remember it being. It's so funny. So this one, the thing about it was a comedy and it got its laughs.
Describe what Marcellus Wallace looks like. What? Say what again?
Actually really tried to have morality not even be an issue at all. That would be me commenting on them. That is me sticking my big nose into their lives and then their philosophies. I let them be who they are. Most of the characters in the movie are given choices to make, and they make the choices that they make, and they pay the price, or the consequences, or they live to tell the tale because of those choices. And we actually see it happen all three different times in the movie. If you just look at the case of John Travolta and Sam Jackson, it was just, well, okay, Sam Jackson made the good choice, made the right choice, and thus he prospers, and John Travolta pays no attention to it, and thus we know he dies. But you have to think about Bruce Willis's choice that happens in this movie, because he actually makes two choices. One, he makes a choice to do a very unhonorable thing. He actually makes the deal with Marcellus Wallace to throw the fight. He doesn't have to. Marcellus doesn't say, throw the fight or you're dead. He makes it for money, and he takes the money and he screws Marcellus with it. But he actually ends up living to tell the tale, right? Because he actually does make a moral choice later when he goes back to save Marcellus. But he's still starting from a very bad place, and he actually ends up prospering, for it. But again, he does make a moral choice that he doesn't have to.
Young bitch, be quiet over there! I mean,
the bottom line is, all right, My storyline jumps all over the place, back and forward. I know as a viewer, the minute I start getting confused, I check out of the movie. I think an audience has like this, like almost like umbilical cord to the screen, and it gets severed. And the thing is, most of the time, when I get confused and that's severed, it's basically because I'm not supposed to be confused. That's like, it's a mistake, all right? However, there's no problem with being momentarily confused if you feel you're in good hands, all right? And I don't think Pulp Fiction, for all of its how it goes in this big circle, I don't think it's hard to watch at all. You have to watch it. I asked for you to watch it. You can't like put this on video and like do the New York Times crossword puzzle and watch the movie. And then once you do that, then you can follow it. It's easy to follow. The real test of time isn't the Friday that it opens, or the way it's how the film is thought of 30 years from now. All right, and that's what I'm going for.